At 10 minutes to 11 on Harvest Sunday, St. Swithin's looked unusually intent upon its own importance. The nave was bright with chrysanthemums and sentimental gourds. The mayor occupied the second pew with a carnation of municipal size. The choir filed in white and scarlet like a well-behaved sweet shop. The anthem had been rehearsed to within an inch of piety, and the choir master, Mr. Fenning, stood with his baton ready to perform the sort of small miracle that impresses mothers. When the organ loosed its soft prelude, a treble stepped forward, cheeks carefully scrubbed, music folder held at the exact angle prescribed by tradition and Mr. Fenning's forefinger. He opened his mouth to sing "Bread of Heaven." What emerged, clear and golden, was not theology at all, but the first paragraph of the Borough Sanitation Report, 1947 to 48, cheerfully set to the hymn's tune. The words, typed neatly on pasted slips, spoke of sluices, drains, and the capacity of culverts. The boy fitted them to the melody with angelic obedience, and the congregation, after a startled silence, expressed itself in a noise not unlike a kettle deciding to boil. Mr. Fenning's baton froze mid-air. The organist, who had fainted only on weekdays, missed 3 chords and found the 4th by accident. The mayor stood half up, then all the way down. The vicar said, "Oh," in a way that suggested he had never expected to hear a culvert sung in E-flat. The gossip burst as if cued. "Deliberate," said the ironmonger in a whisper that could have altered metal. "A plot." "The devil has a typewriter," murmured the verger. "He sings municipal minutes like an angel," observed a pubman approvingly. "Someone wants the council mocked, and I, for one, applaud," said a councillor who did not. When the anthem was halted, Mr. Fenning declining to conduct regulations, there was a tidy scramble in the choir stalls. The treble, still pink about the ears, stared at his folder as though it had betrayed him in a public, which it had. The pasted slips of typed text shaved the printed music in meticulous strips. Each line leaned forward with confident haste. In the hush that followed, a small sound announced the arrival of Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love, who had been on their way to a late breakfast and were diverted by the sight of a congregation attempting not to argue with a child. Purbright took the boy's music with gentle fingers. Love, already reddening at the embarrassment of everyone present, said, "What did you see, lad?" "Music, sir," the boy said miserably. "I mean, paper. It looked right until I sang it. Then it sounded wrong." He stared at his shoes. "I'm sorry about the drains." Purbright's eye moved past the sheet to the objects about it. On the inside of the folder's spine, a staple had been driven in at a slight angle, the metal faintly yellowed, not the church's usual dull steel, but a finer brass. The choir copies were sewn with red thread. This one bristled with precise staples. On the stall rail where the boy had rested his hand clung a pale dusting of white chalk, the sort used by Mr. Fenning to whisper a starting note across wood. Purbright glanced at the hymn board. The numbers had been set neatly, but a ghost of an earlier 73 showed beneath 237, as if changed quickly and in poor light. "Not quite the anthem one expects between a psalm and a plate," he said softly. Mr. Fenning, whose dignity was gasping for breath, demanded to know who had handled the folders that morning. The head chorister named the rota, himself, 2 juniors, and, he added unhappily, Alfie Mott, the treble who had just sung the town's intestines. Alfie's mother, peering from a pew with the determination of a hen counting her eggs, declared that her boy would never mock a vicar on purpose. Alfie agreed desperately. Love, doing his best to be unthreatening to a child, and the Anglican Church at the same time, said, "Who gave you this folder, Alfie?" "It was on my place, sir." With my name card, Purbright looked at the card. The name had been written in a careful school hand long before, but the card itself bore a tiny nick at one corner, a small triangle clipped off cleanly with something sharper than the parish scissors. He filed that detail away with the brass staple and the chalk. The vicar, trembling slightly, pressed forward a whisper from the verger. A few minutes before the service, a man in a grey mac had been seen passing along the north aisle, head turned down, a parcel under his arm tied with a string. He said he was looking for the vestry, the verger added, and he said it in the tone of one who expects people to approve. The vestry is behind him when one is going that way, murmured Purbright, but we must not be harsh with geography. Outside in the porch, the congregation had divided into knots, each knot producing its own chord of opinion. "The boy's been set up," the ironmonger declared. "You can tell by the staples." "I blame the organist," the pub man said. "He's too modern." "It's the mayor," confided the councillor. "He arranged it to look persecuted." "The choir's too clever by half," said a lady who had always found cleverness untrustworthy. Love collected these as if they might be butterflies. Purbright re-entered the chancel and stood where Alfie had stood. The chalk on the rail made a small, bright smear against the dark wood. He lifted the boy's folder to his nose, not quite smelling, but remembering. There was a faint whiff of lemon furniture polish, not the church's beeswax, but something brisker, bought by people who trusted the labels. "Inspector," said Mr. Fenning, who had reached his indignation's summit, "this cannot be allowed. If people carry on like this, we shall be singing the rates by Advent. It would be restful to know what they are," Purbright said. But no. The vicar, who had taken up kindness as a defense, proposed they continue the service with another hymn. The congregation agreed, relieved to be pointed in a different direction. As the choir shuffled its music back into obedience, a small commotion budded near the front pews. A little girl had found a black leather satchel beneath a seat and was solemnly presenting it to the nearest adult, who happened to be the mayor. He accepted it with a face designed for witnesses and lifted the flap. Inside, neat as any exhibit, lay the church's velvet offertory pouch, mouth drawstringed, coins chinking softly with the dignity of moral weight. Pinned to its rim with a brass staple was a tiny price label, the sort one encounters near porcelain shepherdesses. It read, "Found October 6th. Two things occurred at once. Alfie's mother said, "That is not my boy's satchel," and Mr. Fenning said, "That is Alfie's satchel." Love, taking it gently, found the little name tape stitched to the lining. Alfred Mott in blue cotton. Purbright, who had been watching the mayor's gloves rather than the bag, noticed on the strap a streak of white chalk drawn as by a hasty hand, and on the brass buckle a nick shaped like that same tiny triangle. Alfie, swallowing, whispered, "Sir, I didn't put it there." Purbright did not answer him at once. He looked instead at the offertory pouch with its jaunty label, and then at the poised faces of the congregation, all of whom were preparing to choose a side and be loud about it. He closed the satchel with care and said only, "Sergeant, would you be so kind as to accompany Mr. Fenning to the vestry and ask him to show you his stapler?" The organ gave a polite cough. The hymn began. In the third pew, a whisper started to grow teeth, and from the back of the church, the verger, white-faced now, hurried forward with a fresh absurdity. The choir register for that morning, names, anthems, assignments, had been altered in a tidy, forward-leaning hand. Alfie's solo had been written in over another boy's name, the erasures dusting the margin like pale ash. Mr. Fenning's signature was there, perfectly reproduced. Mr. Fenning, reading it, said faintly, "That is not my hand." The congregation spilt into the square after the service in a state of half-amused, half-outraged agitation. Some laughed nervously, declaring it the funniest harvest Sunday in living memory, while others insisted the whole thing was a sacrilege orchestrated by modern degenerates. The mayor attempted a dignified retreat, but was delayed by 3 separate citizens asking if the council would now be obliged to debate drains in song. The choir boys fled in embarrassed knots. Alfie Mott, clinging to his mother's arm as if a firm grip could erase the chalk marks and the satchel entirely. Inspector Purbright, leaving the church at his usual unhurried pace, seemed content to let the town digest its scandal in the open. Sergeant Love, notebook already open, murmured. It's spreading like wildfire, sir. By tea-time, they'll have Alfie declared a Bolshevik. Or a genius, Purbright replied mildly. The two are often confused. He looked back once at the church door, where the verger still lingered with anxious glances. But I think the matter deserves a little quiet questioning before the town convinces itself of a conclusion. Their first stop was Mr. Fenning's house on Wistaria Lane, a neat brick villa where lace curtains trembled with the indignation of its owner. Fenning admitted them with the air of a man who had been personally affronted by Providence. I cannot imagine how my choir could be so undermined, he declared, gesturing them into a parlor scented with polish and hymnals. If this continues, we shall have psalms replaced with cookery books. Love flipped a page of his notebook. About the register, sir. It was altered in handwriting that matched your own. Can you explain how that came about? Fenning's indignation nearly toppled him from his chair. Explain? I should think not. My hand has its faults. Looped L's, timid T's, but forgery is not one of them. Whoever did this is a scoundrel of considerable skill. Purbright glanced about the room. On the writing desk lay a small stapler, brass gleaming. He picked it up, turning it gently. The staples matched those found in Alfie's music folder. An admirable device, he said mildly. You use this for church papers? On occasion, Fenning admitted stiffly, but only when the string is inconvenient. It was purchased years ago from a catalogue in Birmingham, Purbright murmured. He replaced it delicately. And where was it kept this past week? In the vestry cupboard, Fenning answered, then flushed at his own certainty. That is where it should have been. I confess I did not check when they left, Love muttered. It matches, sir. Brass staples, vestry cupboard. He had the means, and indignation, Purbright said gently. But indignation is seldom proof. Back in the square, they encountered Mrs. Malison, in charge of flowers and scandal both. She clutched her basket of chrysanthemums as though they might be called upon to testify. Mark my words, Inspector, this was deliberate mischief aimed at the mayor. Singing drains. What else could it mean? Everyone knows about his sanitation committee. A man passing by with a sack of potatoes contradicted her at once. Rubbish, it's a plot against the choir. That Fenning's been too proud these years, strutting with his baton. From the pub doorway, another voice chimed in, cheerful with ale. If you ask me, it's Broxham again. Antiques, typewriters, trouble, always the same, Love noted each opinion until his pencil squeaked with exhaustion. Purbright listened, head inclined as if gossip were no less useful than evidence. It is a remarkable thing, he said softly. How quickly truth becomes optional once a town decides it prefers drama. By late afternoon, they visited Alfie's home, a modest terrace on Baker's Row. His mother received them defensively, arms folded like shutters. Alfie sat nearby, subdued. My boy's no criminal, Mrs. Mott declared before either officer had spoken. He sang what was written, that's all. He wouldn't know how to paste slips or staple a thing straight. Purbright smiled kindly at the child. You did exactly what was expected, Alfie. But tell me, did you see anyone near your stall before the service began? Alfie frowned, remembering. There was a man, sir. Thin, in a grey coat. He walked past the front row and put something down quickly, like he was late. I thought it was just hymn books. Love exchanged a look with Purbright. Same man the verger saw, sir. Yes, Purbright murmured. Our mysterious stagehand. As they departed, Mrs. Mott called after them, Don't you let the town make a villain of my boy, Inspector. He's innocent, and I'll tell anyone who says otherwise." Evening settled on Flaxborough with its usual drizzle, but the town remained restless. Groups lingered in doorways, discussing culverts in verse and staplers with menace. In the King's Head, voices rang out with new certainties. It's the mayor himself, trying to win sympathy. No, the vicar, testing our faith with jokes. Broxham, without doubt. He's had a typewriter since 1930. Perhaps the choirboy is a prodigy. We should send him to London. Love closed his notebook firmly. "Sir, if gossip were evidence, we'd have solved this twice over." Purbright gave a dry smile. "Evidence, Sergeant, is simply gossip that has been made to sit still. Let us see if we can coax it into a chair." At the corner of the square, Purbright paused. Chalk still dusted the choir stall rail. Staples still gleamed in Fenning's desk, and somewhere in the town a thin man in a grey coat walked unhurriedly with a parcel under his arm. Purbright's eyes softened. "The play is in its second act, Sergeant." "We must be ready when the scenery changes." Love frowned. "And when will that be, sir?" "When?" Purbright said, watching the lamplight blur in the drizzle. "Our playwright decides rehearsal is not enough." By midweek, Flaxborough had managed to embroider the choir incident into half a dozen separate scandals, each with its own chorus of certainty. Some swore it was an attack upon the council, others upon the church, and a few insisted it was merely Alfie Mott's subconscious rebelling against Scales. In the midst of these interpretations, the town prepared itself for the annual harvest fete, a spectacle of raffles, coconut shies, and competitions in jam density. The fete was precisely the kind of stage that an unseen mischief-maker would find irresistible, and Purbright, arriving with "Sergeant Love," remarked as much. "Too many eyes gathered in one place, Sergeant," he said mildly as they crossed the green. "Our playwright could not resist." Love looked about nervously at the stalls, the bunting, the tents trembling in the light breeze. "If they try anything here, sir, the whole town will see." That, perhaps, is the point. At first, the event progressed with benign absurdity. Councillor Prowse presided over the marrow competition, insisting upon calipers, while Mrs. Mallison distributed hymn-shaped bookmarks as prizes for her flower arrangements. The mayor cut a ribbon on the jam stall with solemn precision, and the vicar judged Victoria sponges with the air of a man weighing souls. Purbright strolled quietly, observing faces more than exhibits, while Love hovered near the coconut shy as if expecting danger from the coconuts themselves. The disruption arrived in the form of the raffle draw. The prize was a gleaming tea service, displayed on a table before the crowd. The mayor, with all the dignity of office, drew the winning ticket and announced the number with a flourish. Yet when the prize was lifted, the box lid came free, and instead of porcelain cups and saucers, the crowd beheld an assortment of typed papers, each neatly stacked and labeled. Minutes of the Council, 1932 to 1933. Confidential. A gasp ran through the gathering. Love darted forward, picking up a sheet. The typing leaned forward in the familiar brisk hand. He read aloud the first line. "Discussion of sewer extension deferred indefinitely." Laughter burst from one section of the crowd, indignation from another. The mayor went crimson. "Who has meddled with the raffle?" "This is an outrage." The raffle steward protested that the box had been delivered that very morning by a man in a grey coat. Said he was from the donor's family. Carried it like it weighed a fortune, she added nervously. Love muttered, "The same fellow again, sir." "Yes," Purbright replied quietly, lifting a sheet, "and he has a remarkable sense of continuity." Drains once more. He turned the page delicately, noting the faint green smear along the margin. Our playwright rehearses his themes as any composer might. The gossip, quick as sparks, flew among the crowd. Council corruption laid bare at last. No, it's the vicar. He's teaching humility. Fenning again. He'll staple the town into ruin. Broxham, certainly. He's got cupboards full of old minutes. The raffle was abandoned in disorder, and the tea service, if it had ever existed, remained mythical. Instead, townsfolk departed in knots of excited speculation, each carrying sheets pilfered from the box as if they were relics. Love collected several for the station, stuffing them into his notebook with a sigh. Later, as the fate dwindled to sullen silence and half-eaten cakes, Purbright and Love walked back towards the square. Love said, "They'll hang. This on Broxham, too, sir. Half the crowd swears he's behind it." "Convenient," Purbright murmured, "but unlikely. Broxham is a scapegoat chosen by the town's imagination, not our culprit. Still, scapegoats have their uses." Love looked doubtful. "You mean the real fellow wants Broxham blamed?" "Precisely. While suspicion circles the antique shop, our playwright can continue his rehearsals unnoticed." Purbright glanced at the sheaf of minutes in Love's pocket. "These are harmless on their face, but the pattern is consistent. Council drains, sanitation, old records, parish ledgers. Our mischief maker is not merely mocking us, he is pointing to something buried." That evening, Flaxborough once again hummed with gossip. In the King's Head, patrons raised their pints over pilfered council minutes, reading aloud to general hilarity. At the grocer's, women argued whether Alfie had carried the box himself. In the post office, speculation ran that the missing tea service had been smuggled abroad. The mayor, beleaguered, demanded a special meeting of the council to address an orchestrated attack upon the borough's dignity. Purbright, listening to the noise through the open station window, spoke almost to himself. "The performance grows louder, Sergeant, but the melody is unchanged. Our culprit wants us looking backward, at drains, at records, at ancestry. Perhaps, when the curtain rises on his final act, we shall discover what he has been concealing all along." Love rubbed his forehead, weary of theories. "And until then, sir?" Purbright smiled faintly. "Until then, Sergeant, we listen. The truth has a habit of whispering even while the crowd is shouting." In the lamplight, the fete field lay abandoned, scraps of bunting flapping like the echoes of laughter already curdled into suspicion. Somewhere in the shadows, a thin man in a grey coat might have watched the dispersing townsfolk with quiet satisfaction, parcel under his arm, string taut and tidy. The scandal of the harvest fete had not yet cooled when Flaxborough received its next disturbance. On Thursday evening, the town hall hosted the rehearsal for a civic concert, a modest affair of speeches, patriotic verses, and a final choral rendition of Land of Hope and Glory. The event was intended to restore dignity after the chaos of raffles and hymn parodies. Instead, it became another scene in the same baffling play. Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love, mindful of the pattern, attended quietly at the back of the hall. Councillor Prowse, red-faced but determined, took his place at the lectern with a sheaf of typewritten notes. The mayor sat prominently in the front row, prepared to demonstrate resilience through posture. The choir, still wounded by recent ridicule, hummed nervously behind their music stands. At first all proceeded with decorum. Speeches were delivered, applause scattered dutifully. Then Prowse adjusted his spectacles and began, reading his prepared text. The first lines were patriotic enough, praising Flaxborough's civic spirit. But as he turned the page, his voice faltered. Instead of a continuation, the sheet bore a meticulous parody. "It is proposed that councillors take their baths in rotation to conserve water and encourage unity." The hall erupted with stifled laughter. Prowse blundered on, his ears crimson, but the next page was worse. That the mayor's chain be replaced with a string of sausages, more suited to his office. At this, laughter broke fully, and the mayor half rose in outrage. Pages fluttered from Prowse's hand, each sheet another insult, another absurdity. The type leaned forward with the same brisk authority Purbright had come to expect. Love muttered under his breath. "Same hand again, sir." Purbright inclined his head, eyes calm upon the spectacle. "Our playwright does not tire of rehearsing." The choir, sensing calamity, attempted to drown the laughter with their opening bars of Land of Hope and Glory. But when the organ thundered its introduction, the music books betrayed them once more. Each page bore careful insertions of satirical verses, lampooning local worthies and parish scandals. The sopranos stumbled on lines about drainage, the basses rumbled through accusations of bribery, and the altos sang a hymn to unpaid rates. The hall dissolved into uproar, some cheering, some jeering, many shouting at once. The mayor stormed out, Prowse flung his spectacles onto the floor, and the choir master nearly fainted. Only Purbright remained seated, watching the chaos as though it were a performance whose ending he already knew. When the uproar subsided, Purbright stood and asked quietly to see the music books and Prowse's speech notes. Each bore the same signature clues, faint smears of sharp-scented polish, tiny brass staples, and the neat, forward-leaning type. He examined them without comment, then handed them to Love. The gossip began at once, spreading even before the crowd had left the hall. "It's Fenning. He's trying to ruin the choir deliberately." "No, it's Broxham. He's got a cellar full of typewriters. Maybe it's Prowse himself. He reads too smoothly for an innocent or the mayor, staging persecution again." Love sighed as he scribbled them down. "We'll drown in theories, sir." "Every name in town's been mentioned now. Not quite every name," Purbright said softly. He stepped to the lectern, where the brass lamp had been shifted askew. On its rim clung another faint smear of green. He touched it with his thumb, then wiped it discreetly on his handkerchief. "But soon, Sergeant, our culprit will need more than parody. He will need to act upon the very records he mocks. Then I think we shall see him falter." They left the hall to find the townsfolk already arguing in the square. Some accused Alfie Mott again, others whispered darkly about a stranger in a grey coat, seen slipping away before the uproar. The verger swore he had glimpsed the man near the vestry earlier in the week. A farmer insisted the thin fellow had bought twine from him, exacting about the length. Love, weary of contradictions, asked, "Why twine, sir?" Purbright looked up at the darkening sky. "Because twine ties parcels, Sergeant. And our man has been delivering parcels of mischief all week. It is only a matter of time before he ties one too tightly." That night the town buzzed with rumors. In parlors and pubs, people argued whether the culprit meant to disgrace the council, to topple the church, or merely to entertain himself at Flaxborough's expense. But in the quiet of the police station, Purbright considered the pattern more deeply. Each parody, each insertion, was not random. They all touched upon the same themes: drains, records, respectability. And beneath them all lay the same whisper that the past, once disturbed, could undermine the present. He folded the speech notes and set them beside the choir's corrupted books. "The curtain is rising higher, Sergeant," he said softly. "Our playwright's comedy is moving towards tragedy." Love rubbed his temple. "And when will we see the end of it?" "When?" Purbright replied, his voice mild as ever. "The truth becomes funnier than the lies." By Friday morning, the town had achieved what it always did in times of embarrassment. It found a scapegoat and clung to him with renewed self-confidence. The newspapers, the queues at the grocer's, and the knots of drinkers outside the King's Head all agreed. Mr. Fenning, choir master, was the architect of Flaxborough's humiliation. His brass stapler, his proximity to the music folders, his reputation for pedantry, all these were collected like exhibits at a trial without judge or jury. Inspector Purbright read the Chronicle's headline without visible reaction. "Choir leader accused in scandal of songs." The article managed to convict Fenning while still demanding a proper inquiry, a feat of balance that satisfied everyone who wanted both justice and entertainment. Sergeant Love, reading over his shoulder, muttered, "They've hanged him already, sir. Poor man doesn't stand a chance." Fenning himself appeared at the station before noon, flushed and shaking, carrying his maligned stapler wrapped in a handkerchief. "I will not be slandered, Inspector. This," he held out the little machine as though it were both weapon and shield, "has never left my desk except for the vestry." Any fool could see that Purbright examined the stapler with polite gravity. "It is certainly an efficient tool," he remarked mildly, "but efficiency is not proof. Tell me, Mr. Fenning, who else has access to your vestry cupboard?" "Everyone," Fenning admitted bitterly. "The vicar, the verger, the entire choir, half the flower committee. It is no fortress." Inspector Love leaned forward. "And on the night of the concert rehearsal?" Fenning spread his hands in despair. "I was present, Sergeant, conducting chaos as usual. Do you think I would orchestrate my own downfall?" When Fenning had departed, his dignity still clinging like a loose cassock, Love asked quietly, "Do you believe him, sir?" Purbright's gaze remained on the little stapler. "Belief, Sergeant, is a dangerous luxury, but I find it unlikely that a man would sabotage himself so elaborately when lesser vanities are already available." Meanwhile, the gossip grew louder, and with it the catalogue of supposed motives. "He's jealous of Alfie's talent." "No, he wanted to embarrass the mayor for refusing funds for choir robes." "He's always hated Broxham. This is revenge by proxy." "I heard him humming about drains once." Love dutifully scribbled these down, though his pencil seemed to drag with weariness. "Sir, if gossip were rope, we could hang the whole town twice over." "That," Purbright observed gently, "is precisely what our culprit relies upon. The more the town convicts the innocent, the safer he becomes." That afternoon, Purbright paid another visit to the church vestry. The cupboard stood ajar, its shelves still cluttered with hymnals, wax, and polish. On the inside of the door, a faint scuff of chalk remained, curved like the arc of a careless hand. Purbright touched it thoughtfully. Love, hovering beside him, asked, "The same chalk as Alfie's stall rail?" "Exactly so," Purbright murmured. "But note, chalk marks vanish quickly when wiped. This one has been left for us, as deliberately as a signature." Leaving the vestry, they walked through the churchyard, where a cluster of townsfolk stood debating with more fervor than reverence. One declared Fenning guilty because he's too educated. Another swore it was Broxham again. Antiques, staples, typewriters, it all fits. A third, with relish, hinted at the vicar himself, citing the altered choir register as proof of pastoral mischief. Love frowned as they walked on. "They'll tear Fenning apart, sir, unless we clear him." "But we've no other suspect solid enough." "On the contrary," Purbright said mildly. "We have too many suspects, all solid in gossip but hollow in fact. Our playwright has ensured that every path leads to absurdity. That, Sergeant, is the cleverest disguise of all evening brought new fuel for speculation." A parcel was discovered on the steps of the post office, neatly tied with string. Inside lay another stack of typewritten sheets, each parodying official documents. One declared the mayor had applied for a license to keep geese in the council chamber. Another alleged Councillor Prowse intended to replace lamp posts with scarecrows. At the bottom of the pile lay a note. "Return the other one." Love held the note gingerly. "The same words as the chain business, sir." "Yes," Purbright replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Our playwright repeats himself with purpose. There is another object, another record, missing, and he wants it back, or wants us to believe so." The town, however, seized only upon the absurdities. By nightfall they were retelling the scarecrow plan as fact, with entire streets arguing whether it might improve gas consumption. Fenning's guilt seemed to fade slightly as new distractions took hold, though his reputation remained bruised. Back at the station, Purbright laid the new sheets beside the others, forming a growing stack of mischief. "Do you notice, Sergeant," he said quietly, "how our culprit keeps pressing us towards the past? Minutes, ledgers, registers. Never the present. He wishes to erase or conceal something behind the laughter. And until we find what that is, the town will continue its rehearsal." Love rubbed his eyes. "So what now?" Purbright folded his hands. "Now we wait for the next set piece. A play must have 3 acts, Sergeant. We have had 2 already. The third will tell us what has been hidden all along." By Saturday afternoon, the air in Flaxborough had turned from amusement to unease. The fete debacle and the concert rehearsal had provided laughter, but beneath it was the sense that the town itself was being manipulated like a puppet. Every new parody, every fresh packet of typewritten absurdities, chipped at the borough's sense of respectability. The mayor, determined to seize back some control, called an extraordinary meeting of the council in the chambers above the town hall. He announced it as a chance to restore order and confidence, though most citizens attended in the hope of witnessing another disaster. Inspector Purbright, accompanied by Sergeant Love, took a seat unobtrusively near the rear of the chamber. He seemed almost detached, as though he were waiting not for debate but for confirmation of something already known. Love, by contrast, kept glancing around as if the thin man in the grey coat might materialize between the pews. The meeting began stiffly. Councillor Prowse read aloud a resolution condemning acts of deliberate satire, while the treasurer muttered anxiously over his papers. For a few minutes, all appeared dull enough to disappoint the audience. Then the mayor rose with a prepared speech, determined to strike a tone of solemnity. He unfolded the typed sheets before him, cleared his throat, and began. The first paragraph was conventional. The second was not. "This council resolves to replace its minutes with mime, thereby saving paper and ink." The third followed swiftly. "That future mayors be elected by coconut shy, the winner being whoever knocks down the most municipal officials." Laughter erupted from the gallery. The mayor, crimson with outrage, turned to glare at the treasurer, who had provided the notes. But the treasurer only shook his head helplessly, fumbling with his case. Papers spilled onto the floor, fluttering like startled birds. Love lunged forward to gather them and froze. Every sheet bore the same familiar hand, brisk and leaning with smears of polish along the margins. "Sir," he whispered urgently to Purbright, "it's them again." "They've switched the mayor's speech." "Yes," Purbright said mildly, "and at the most public of moments. Our playwright knows his cues." The uproar grew. Councillors argued, the gallery jeered, and a woman shouted that the borough ought to be run by school children. In the din, Purbright moved quietly to the treasurer's case. He bent as though helping Love retrieve the scattered sheets, but his eyes were on the lining. There, almost invisible, clung a scrap of blue velvet thread. He slipped it into his pocket before anyone noticed. When order was at last restored, the meeting collapsed without conclusion. The mayor stormed out, Prowse pursued him with protests, and the treasurer gathered his papers with trembling hands. The citizens poured into the street, gossip bursting at once. "Proof it's the treasurer. He's bungled the whole thing." "No, the mayor staged it, just to look persecuted." Fenning again, obviously. "He's in love with Staples or that boy Alfie. Singing drains was only the beginning." Love scribbled down the contradictions with grim patience. "They'll have us chasing ghosts forever, sir." "Every theory contradicts the last, which," Purbright murmured, "is exactly what our culprit intends." A town in confusion makes an excellent hiding place. That evening, in the quiet of the station, Purbright laid out the day's evidence: the corrupted speech, the scattered notes, the velvet thread. He considered them for a long while before speaking. Do you see the shape, Sergeant? First hymns, then raffles, then rehearsal, now the council itself. Each act larger, more public. Our playwright is escalating, but the true theft, the true purpose, lies not in parody but in what has vanished beneath it. Love rubbed his forehead. The records, sir? You think this is about the parish books still? Not only parish books, Purbright said softly. Records of all kinds. Registers, minutes, accounts. Any page that ties present respectability to past truth. That is the prize. The rest is noise to cover its removal. As the town buzzed with fresh rumors, Purbright gazed out at the lamps flickering in the square. The play nears its final act, Sergeant. And when the curtain rises, we must be certain which of our audience is also the actor. Love shut his notebook with a snap. And until then, Purbright replied with his usual mildness, we let the performance continue. Every actor, after all, reveals himself when the play demands an encore. By Sunday morning, Flaxborough was exhausted by its own speculation, yet unable to stop producing more. The church bells tolled, but few thought of worship. They came instead to compare theories in the square. The mayor had retreated into self-righteous silence. Councillor Prowse blustered in public but whispered nervously in private, and the treasurer kept to his office with the air of a man guarding not only figures, but his life. The town had become a stage, every conversation a performance, every shrug or raised eyebrow another clue to be dissected in kitchens and pubs. Inspector Purbright, moving gently through this ferment, seemed less concerned with the words themselves than with who spoke them and when. He paused outside Broxham's shop, where a small knot of people argued loudly about Fenning. He did it, said one, because he hates the mayor. Another shook his head. He did it because he hates the children. A third insisted Fenning was merely the tool of larger forces, though what forces remained undefined. Sergeant Love sighed as he scribbled down yet more contradictions. It's like a village choir, sir. All singing different tunes and none in key. Even so, Sergeant, Purbright murmured. One may learn much from the attempt. Discord has its pattern. They continued towards the rectory, where the vicar received them with anxious hospitality. He produced a letter that had arrived that morning. On its single sheet was typed a sentence. The past must be cleansed, or it will choke the present. It was the same hand, the same brisk type, with the faintest smear of polish at the corner. Love groaned. They're sermonizing now. As if mocking us wasn't enough, but Purbright's eyes softened with interest. Observe, Sergeant, the choice of word. Not hidden nor changed, but cleansed. Our playwright wishes not merely to conceal the past, but to launder it. The vicar wrung his hands. Inspector, if the records are altered, if names are erased, families may lose all sense of who they are. Baptisms, marriages, burials, they are the roots of our people. Indeed, Purbright said gently, which is why someone is willing to risk scandal to alter them. As they left, Love asked, So we're not looking for a prankster at all, sir. We're looking for someone with something to hide or to protect, Purbright replied softly. That afternoon they called again on Fenning, still pale from the Chronicle's attacks. He showed them a packet he had discovered in his letterbox, parody verses mocking his choir, typed as always, bound with red and white twine. They want me ruined, he said bitterly, and the town is only too happy to help. Purbright accepted the packet, studying the twine. Curious, he remarked. The knot is clumsy. Our culprit types with care, but ties parcels with haste. That sergeant may yet betray him. By evening, Flaxborough was alive again with rumors. In the King's Head, patrons debated which councillor's lineage might crumble if parish ledgers were truly examined. At the bakery, a woman whispered that the treasurer's grandfather had once vanished mysteriously. In the draper's, Mrs. Malison declared she had seen the thin man in the grey coat buying string. Each rumour clung stubbornly to life, feeding suspicion like kindling. Love, wearied by the tide of nonsense, asked, "Do you think the treasurer himself could be behind it, sir? He's the one with the most access to papers, and he did look white as chalk at the council." Purbright smiled faintly. "You are learning, Sergeant. But one must not conclude before the play's final act. Still, yes, the treasurer's fear has been louder than his denials." They walked together across the square as dusk settled, lamps flickering on in the mist. Purbright paused by the notice board, where a fresh sheet of paper fluttered. It was another typed parody, mocking the council's accounts. Proposed that borough funds be allocated to soap for cleansing history. At the bottom, in small neat letters, was the same phrase as before. "Return the other one." Love exhaled sharply. Again, always that phrase. "What other one, sir?" Purbright studied the notice for a long moment. A missing record, a ledger perhaps, or a page torn out. Something our culprit cannot complete his work without. That, Sergeant, is what he wants returned. And until it is, he will keep rehearsing before the town. They walked on, the sound of their steps echoing off the cobbles. From nearby windows came the murmur of gossip, the rustle of papers, the rising anxiety of a town that sensed its own history was being rewritten. Purbright's voice, when he spoke again, was almost thoughtful. "The curtain is close to rising on the final act. And when it does, Sergeant, the audience will discover that they themselves have been part of the play all along." By Monday morning, Flaxborough had woven itself into a dense tapestry of suspicion. What began as a comic scandal now wore a darker hue. If parish records could be stolen, altered, or mocked, then no man's family tree was safe. Some households quietly searched their Bibles and faded certificates. Others whispered about inheritances waiting to be unpicked. The gossip no longer laughed. It clung. Inspector Purbright, walking with Sergeant Love through the misty square, listened to the scraps of conversation drifting from shop fronts. A butcher told his customer that Councillor Prowse's grandmother had 2 husbands, both alive at once. A woman in the grocer's murmured that the mayor's chain itself had been forged to disguise a false lineage. Outside the post office, an old man declared loudly that the treasurer was born under another name altogether. Each tale, brisk and confident, leaned as neatly forward as the typewriter that had spawned the town's confusion. Love groaned as he scribbled them down. "It's endless, sir. They've taken the bait whole. Everyone's a suspect and everyone's a victim." "Exactly so," Purbright replied mildly. "Our playwright has given the town what it enjoys most, the chance to accuse without consequence, but behind their chorus, one voice trembles differently. We must listen for it." They began with Broxham, whose antique shop had suffered most from repeated whispers. He greeted them stiffly, pointing to the empty window. "Inspector, I have cleared my displays entirely. If a teaspoon were left there, it would be declared counterfeit by noon. They want me ruined." Purbright's gaze softened. "Yes, Mr. Broxham, but you have survived worse fashions. Tell me, have you sold any old registers, ledgers, parish books in recent months?" Broxham looked genuinely offended. "I deal in furniture, Inspector. Marquetry, not marriages. If I had known books were so valuable, I might have stocked them." As they left, Love muttered, "He's bitter, sir, but I don't think guilty." "Bitterness," Purbright replied, "is the smoke, not the fire." Their next call was upon the treasurer, who received them in his office with eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. His desk was piled high with papers, some genuine, others suspiciously too neat. He clutched his briefcase as though it were an organ vital to life. "Inspector, I can assure you, all borough accounts are in order. These rumors, they're malicious nonsense." Purbright regarded him steadily. "Rumors, yes. But you are aware, I think, that the typed parodies echo your ledgers more closely than they do any hymn book. Someone with access to your papers is rehearsing their comedy at your expense. The treasurer's hands twitched upon the case. I cannot explain it. Perhaps a clerk, perhaps an intruder. Or perhaps yourself, Purbright said gently. The treasurer started, but Purbright continued in the same mild tone. When a man clutches a case so tightly, one wonders if he guards his work or his secret. Love watched the treasurer flounder, eyes darting like a cornered animal. But Purbright rose with quiet courtesy. We shall leave you to your figures for now, sir. Numbers do not lie, but men sometimes make them rehearse. That evening, as rain tapped the windows of the station, the gossip reached a fresh pitch. In the King's Head, a patron swore he had seen the thin man in the grey coat entering the treasurer's house by the back gate. A farmer insisted he recognized the same man buying twine from him last week. Mrs. Mallison told anyone who would listen that the man was foreign, by which I mean not from Flaxborough. Love dropped his notebook on the desk. We're circling, sir. The grey man is a ghost. They see him everywhere. If he exists, he's enjoying the attention. Or, Purbright said softly, he's the mask they are invited to see. Our culprit walks among them, unremarked, while they chase a shadow. He drew from his pocket the scrap of velvet thread recovered at the council chamber. He laid it beside the parody, sheets, the raffle minutes, the altered hymns. Each bore the same trio of marks, polish, staples, thread. Quietly, he said, the threads lead us not to the choir, nor the antiques, but to someone who handles boxes and cases often. Someone who must disguise their true errand with laughter. Love leaned forward, voice low. The treasurer, then. Perhaps, Purbright murmured. But until the final act, Sergeant, we do not applaud. We wait. Flaxborough outside continued its rehearsals. At supper tables, names were tested like accusations. In parlors, histories were rewritten aloud. And somewhere in the mist, the thin man in the grey coat, or the thought of him, walked quietly, carrying his parcel under string, while the town wondered who among them would be unmasked when the play at last reached its climax. Tuesday dawned with a damp brightness, the kind of weather Flaxborough disliked most, since it robbed the town of both its gloom and its excuses. The day was given over to the annual civic parade, a ritual of banners, brass bands, and school children in paper hats, designed to demonstrate the borough's dignity to itself. After the chaos of the fete and the council meeting, the event had been declared an opportunity to show the world that Flaxborough still possessed composure. It was therefore almost certain that the parade would be chosen for the next disturbance. Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love watched from the steps of the police station as the procession assembled. The mayor, chain polished to a gleam, led the march with solemn tread. Councillor Prowse followed, holding aloft a banner proclaiming "Progress through Prudence." Behind them trailed the town band, 3 steps behind the beat, and a file of schoolboys practicing seriousness. The crowd lined the streets, expectant, their chatter thick with the memory of past humiliations. At first all seemed safe. The brass band blared gamely, the children waved flags, and the mayor's chain caught the sunlight. But as the parade reached the square, the mischief revealed itself. The banners at the front had been altered. Where "Progress through Prudence" had been painted, a new slogan appeared in bold, forward-leaning type: "Progress through Plumbing." A second banner, meant to celebrate Flaxborough's heritage, read instead, "Founded on drains, flourishing in sewers." Laughter tore through the crowd. The mayor halted in outrage, demanding to know who had touched the banners. Councillor Prowse blustered about sabotage. Meanwhile the band faltered, their music sheets fluttering to the ground. Love stooped to catch one, and froze. Typed onto the staves, neatly pasted, were verses not of music but of parody. lines accusing councillors of laundering accounts and baptizing ledgers. The players, confused, attempted to perform what they saw, producing a cacophony of notes that matched no tune. The crowd erupted. Some laughed until tears came, others booed, and a few shouted accusations across the square. The children, sensing license, began chanting the new slogans with gusto. The mayor, purple with fury, tore the altered banner from Prowse's grip, but the damage was done. The civic parade had become a carnival of ridicule. Love, clutching the sheet, muttered, "Same type, sir. He's mocking us in public now." Purbright nodded mildly. Our playwright has chosen his grandest stage yet. But note the refinement. Always drains, always records. He rehearses the same theme over and over. As order was reluctantly restored, a curious discovery was made. Beneath the reviewing stand, hidden under the mayor's chair, lay a small wooden box, its lid pinned with brass staples. Inside were scraps of paper, each one a parody entry cut from parish registers, marriages mismatched, births misdated, deaths contradicted. Among them was a single genuine page, torn from the church's ledger, its margin rough. Across it was typed, "Return the other one." Purbright lifted the page carefully, eyes narrowing. So here it is at last. Proof of the theft. One page stolen, the rest mocked to disguise it. Our culprit has been rehearsing while he searched for, or concealed, this very sheet. The gossip burst anew. It's the treasurer, only he cares about records. No, it's Broxham. He's always hoarding old papers. The vicar, surely. Who else handles parish books? Fenning again? Everything's his fault, Love scribbled wearily, then asked, "But why this page, sir? Why not the whole book?" "Because," Purbright said softly, "the whole book would draw suspicion. One page alone can change a life, or preserve a lie. Our culprit needs this page hidden, but cannot destroy it without notice, so he buries it among laughter, hoping no one sees its absence." That night, as the square emptied and the ruined parade became only another story for the King's Head, Purbright laid the torn page beside the others at the station. He studied it a long while, then folded it carefully away. "The play nears its end, Sergeant. The curtain rises for the final act, and when it falls, Flaxborough will discover that the comedy has always been about one man's fear of the truth." Love shivered slightly, though the room was warm. "Then tomorrow, sir?" "Tomorrow," Purbright murmured, "we test our players. And the guilty one will not enjoy the encore." By Wednesday morning, Flaxborough's sense of humor had soured entirely. The parade debacle lingered like a bad tune, replayed in every shop, office, and pub. The slogans about drains and sewers had found their way onto school blackboards, and one enterprising ironmonger had placed a sign outside his shop reading, "Progress through plumbing, buckets half price." The mayor retreated to his study in fury, and Councillor Prowse threatened libel actions he had no intention of carrying out. It was against this backdrop of embarrassment that Inspector Purbright decided it was time to set his trap. He began by inviting the principal figures to the council chamber for what he described as a clarification meeting. The mayor arrived stiff-backed, the treasurer pale and sweating, Fenning tight-lipped, and Broxham resentful but curious. The vicar, nervous yet polite, joined them at Purbright's request. Sergeant Love hovered nearby, notebook ready, his eyes darting between the assembled faces as though expecting the guilty party to suddenly declare themselves. Purbright spoke with his usual mild courtesy. "Gentlemen, Flaxborough has suffered more theatre in the past week than it has in the past decade. Our culprit has made rehearsals of hymns, fêtes, concerts, parades, and council debates. Each time the signature has been the same: brisk typewriting, brass staples, a smear of sharp-scented polish, and, occasionally, a thread of velvet. Always the same motifs, always rehearsed with precision. He paused, his eyes moving over them. But there is one thing our culprit has lacked: subtlety of motive. For while the town laughs or argues or points its fingers at Mr. Fenning or Mr. Broxham, one truth remains. These disturbances were never about entertainment. They were about erasing or concealing a record. One page, torn from the parish register. That is the true prize, and all the rest mere distraction. Love, though he knew Purbright's reasoning well enough, felt the atmosphere tighten. The mayor shifted uncomfortably, Prowse scowled, and Broxham muttered about being dragged into affairs that were not his. The treasurer sat rigid, fingers clenched on his briefcase. Purbright allowed the silence to deepen before continuing. The missing page concerns a marriage entered in 1899. That entry, if read aloud in this chamber, would cause great difficulty for one of you, and so I wonder, who among you most fears the past? The treasurer licked his lips. This is outrageous. You cannot accuse us all without proof. Purbright looked at him with quiet eyes. No accusation yet, sir. Merely a question. He turned slightly. Sergeant, be so kind as to hand me the packet we prepared earlier. Love produced a sealed envelope, which Purbright opened deliberately. Inside was a page, typed in the same brisk hand as all the parodies. Purbright laid it flat on the table. This, he said, is a copy of the torn register entry. I propose to read it aloud, but perhaps one of you will prefer to spare us the necessity. He did not look directly at anyone, yet the air seemed to vibrate with expectation. The mayor coughed pompously, Prowse tugged his cuffs, Broxham folded his arms, and Fenning stared straight ahead. The treasurer, however, shifted in his seat. His breath came too quickly, his hand strayed again to his briefcase. Purbright's tone remained almost conversational. You see, Sergeant, when a man fears the past, he betrays himself in the present. His eyes, his hands, even the way he clutches a case. Love leaned forward, whispering, It's him, sir. At last, the treasurer broke. Stop, he blurted, half rising. You don't understand. I couldn't let it come out. My grandfather's marriage, invalid, irregular, if anyone discovered it, my whole family's name would be destroyed. The confession hung in the air. The mayor gave a startled gasp of satisfaction. Prowse muttered a triumphant, I knew it, and Broxham gave a thin smile of relief. Fenning looked as though he might faint from vindication. The treasurer sagged back into his chair, his voice breaking. I only meant to replace the page, to write it properly, to erase the shame. But the town, always mocking, always watching, I had to distract them. So I gave them theatre, a hymn or two, a parody, a joke about drains. They laughed while I tried to set things right. Purbright regarded him gently. But truth, sir, cannot be rehearsed. It remains the same however much one pastes over it, and laughter, though useful for a time, cannot conceal fear forever. The treasurer bowed his head. I never wanted it to go so far. Purbright inclined his head slightly, signaling love. The sergeant stepped forward, laying a hand on the briefcase at last. There was no resistance now. Outside, Flaxborough's gossip would already be shifting, ready to tell the story in its own way. But inside the chamber, the quiet trap had sprung, not with spectacle, but with the softest of nudges. The treasurer's confession did not silence Flaxborough. It merely gave the town new material, and by the following morning, every shop counter, bar stool, and queue was alive with improved versions of his downfall. In one retelling, he had forged half the parish registers. In another, he had invented a second family in Lincoln. Some insisted he was part of a conspiracy with Broxham, others that he had been blackmailed by the thin man in the grey coat. What none agreed on was the dull truth, that he had merely tried to tidy away an inconvenient marriage entry and had chosen to distract the town with farce while he worked. Inspector Purbright allowed the rumours to swirl uncorrected for a day. On Thursday evening, in the council chamber, he assembled the councillors, the vicar, Mr. Fenning, Broxham, and a selection of townsfolk who had suffered the sharper end of gossip. Sergeant Love, notebook in hand, perched at the edge of his chair, waiting for the revelation that he knew was coming but had not yet heard in full. Purbright began without theatrics, his tone as calm as ever. "You will recall," he said, "that each disturbance bore the same signature. Typed pages, brisk and forward-leaning, brass staples where none belonged, smears of lemon polish, and on occasion, a thread of velvet. These were not accidents. They were the calling cards of our culprit. At first, the objects were chosen for amusement: a choir folder, a raffle box, a music book, the mayor's speech. Each created uproar, each distracted us, and while we laughed or argued, one page was quietly removed from the parish register. A marriage entry from 1899. He lifted the torn sheet, carefully sealed in its evidence envelope. The councillors craned forward, the vicar turned pale, and Fenning sniffed as though his vindication ought to be sung. "The treasurer," Purbright continued, "discovered this page some weeks ago while reviewing parish accounts for a bequest. It recorded his grandfather's marriage to another woman, one not deceased at the time of his second union. In short, bigamy. An embarrassment then, a potential scandal now. If the page were noticed, it would render the treasurer's own family name dubious, even illegitimate. So he decided it must disappear." The treasurer, hollow-eyed, bowed his head. "But a page cannot vanish quietly," Purbright went on. "Parish records are watched, so he gave us theatre. He typed parodies, pasted them into hymnals and speeches, turned a raffle into a joke. Each scene made us focus on the absurdity, not the theft. He scattered brass staples from his vestry cupboard, polish from his own desk, threads from the velvet lining of his briefcase. He wished us to laugh so that he might rewrite history unseen. But repetition betrays. A hand that writes too often cannot help but leave its style, as surely as ink leaves a stain." Love, caught in the moment, asked, "And the thin man in the grey coat, sir?" Purbright gave the faintest of smiles. "Ah, our most convincing phantom. A figure mentioned by the verger, by Mrs. Malison, by Alfie Mott. Each description vague, each sighting in shadow. A spectre designed to be remembered but never identified. In truth, nothing more than suggestion, sown by the treasurer himself, repeated until it seemed fact. The town wished to see him, so they did. A ghost in a mac, carrying parcels of nothing." A murmur spread across the room, half relief, half disappointment. The mayor, finding his voice, said pompously, "Then we may assure the Chronicle that this business is concluded. Flaxborough has been vindicated." "Not quite, Mayor," Purbright said gently. "Flaxborough has been entertained, confused, and made ridiculous. But that is not the same as vindication. A man tried to alter your history, and you preferred to laugh rather than notice. Perhaps next time you will look more closely before you join the chorus." The mayor flushed, Prowse coughed, and Fenning made a small triumphant sound that drew sharp looks from his neighbours. Afterwards, as the meeting dissolved into chatter, Love walked with Purbright across the darkened square. "You knew all along, didn't you, sir?" The treasurer's fear gave him away. Purbright shook his head mildly. "Not all along, Sergeant. But fear is the most reliable witness. It trembles long before it speaks." Love frowned. "Do you think the town has learned anything?" "Perhaps," Purbright said, pausing beneath a lamp where the mist curled like stage smoke. "They may think twice before believing every parody pinned to a wall. But Flaxborough thrives on gossip as fields do on rain. Tomorrow they will find a new scandal to amuse them. Our treasurer will fade into a cautionary tale, somewhere between the man who painted his cow and the vicar who lost his cassock in a storm." Love chuckled softly, closing his notebook for the last time. And for us, sir? For us, Purbright replied. Another play, another curtain. The stage of Flaxborough is never empty for long. They walked on together, their footsteps echoing on the cobbles. Behind them the council chamber dimmed, its windows glowing faintly before settling into silence. And in the quiet of the town, life returned to its routines. Shopkeepers with their counters, the choir with its hymns, the mayor with his chain, a little more dented but still glittering. The scandal would soon be woven into Flaxborough's folklore, and Inspector Purbright, as ever, would stand patient for the next absurdity to arrive.